Marcus Hayes carried his past like a quiet weight, visible only when he chose to show it. A retired Army Special Forces veteran with tours in urban conflict zones, Marcus had come home scarred, not just in body, but in the way systems had ached around him. A mix of gratitude, suspicion, and tired dismissal. He'd tried to channel the discipline and tactical instincts that once kept whole teams alive into something civic, volunteering at the city's community safety workshops, guest lecturing at the police academy about threat assessment, and consulting for the municipal emergency response team in a freelance capacity. The same intuition that made him invaluable also set him apart. He wasn't in uniform anymore, and his stories of extraction corridors, behavioral reading, and improvisational breach planning earned more raised eyebrows than respect in many precinct briefing rooms. Officer Daniel Cooper was one of those eyebrows. A 10-year veteran of the city police department, white, affable in public, but rigid in the hierarchy he'd internalized. Cooper had risen on procedural certainty. He had heard about Marcus in passing, that guy who keeps showing up at the workshops, and had listened to one of his early briefings with polite detachment. When Marcus casually described how a seemingly routine, suspicious person drill mirrored insurgent hiding patterns in a crowded transit hub, Cooper smirked in front of the group. "You sound like you're still in the sandbox," he said loud enough for others to hear. "All that tactical knowledge is just war stories. We've got protocols here. We don't improvise like in a movie." Marcus didn't bite then. He had learned the hard way that pushing too hard on pride left people defensive. He let it sit like a bruise. The tension sat in the margins of briefings. Cooper would joke, sometimes veiled, sometimes blunt, about veterans who saw threats behind every lamppost, while the younger officers who admired Marcus's quiet competence found themselves caught in the middle of an unspoken loyalty tug-of-war. That week, the city was buzzing with a newly opened municipal complex, a combined courthouse and social services hub in the downtown core, intended to centralize services. Marcus had been invited to run a low-key community safety clinic in the atrium that morning. He'd brought fold-out maps, behavioral cue handouts, and a small volunteer team of former military medics now working in emergency medicine. Cooper was assigned to security detail for a ribbon-cutting event nearby. As the crowd swelled and local officials gave speeches about modern civic safety, the old friction between real-world chaos and bureaucratic calm hummed underneath, a pressure cooker waiting for a spark. 2 days earlier, during a routine infrastructure review, Marcus had been walking the old service corridors beneath the municipal complex as part of a safe egress walk-through for the safety workshop. He noticed something off. A supply closet door that should have been locked was slightly ajar. The security camera feed on a dusty monitor had a lag in its loop, and the ventilation shaft adjacent to the second-floor customer service wing had been modified with a non-standard grill, weld marks disguised with fresh paint. He traced foot traffic patterns in his notebook, mentally overlaying how someone could exploit the modified shaft to move unseen. He also had heard a maintenance worker offhandedly remark that a contractor, newly hired to update accessibility, had asked unnecessary questions about internal layouts and had lingered in restricted zones claiming, "just checking because the designers wanted a better understanding." Marcus submitted an informal note through the proper chain, armed with sketches and suggestions. Tighten the access points, sweep the modified air shaft, validate the contractor's credentials, and run a soft behavioral awareness drill with front desk staff. The note landed in the inbox of the deputy facilities manager and then into the hands of the security coordinator, who passed it along with a polite, "We've got it scheduled in the next week. Everything looks routine." The ribbon-cutting schedule left little bandwidth for disruptive what-ifs. He brought the same concerns in person to the on-site security briefing the morning of the opening. Cooper was present, arms folded as Marcus laid out, without drama, the potential exploitation vectors, and a simple low-cost mitigation. Station a uniformed officer with covert awareness near the modified shaft. Do a quick verification of all contractor IDs, and have the front-of-house staff run an unannounced friendly challenge to test awareness. Cooper waved a hand. "We've got it covered. If there's a threat, it'll show itself. I don't need a war movie script to tell me when something's wrong." The room turned a little quieter. The veteran's expertise was politely cataloged as extra caution rather than a necessary recalibration of attention. Marcus stepped back, the older reflex of tension tightening in his gut. He sent a text to a younger officer who'd privately asked his opinion earlier. Keep an eye on the shaft. If anyone is too interested in how the building flows and doesn't have a badge to go with it, tell me. Coop's thinking we're fine. The junior officer nodded. The municipal hub opened amid speeches, laughter, and applause. No one yet knew the modified shaft had become a planned ingress point for someone who'd been watching the city's increasing security theater with a sharp, predatory gaze. Mid-morning, as the official photos were being taken and local news crews captured smiles in front of the new complex's signature glass atrium, the world pivoted. A quiet buzz exploded into controlled chaos. In the West Wing, a section housing the Juvenile Mediation Office, an armed man in a dark jacket slipped through a service door that had been propped open by an overworked custodian. He had spent the last week observing the slight delays in camera coverage, the times when guards rotated out and nobody backfilled the blind spots, the way the building's design funneled civilians through predictable choke points. His plan was surgical. He moved with rehearsed calm, neutralizing a junior clerk with a silenced pistol, and then entering the public area where dozens of civilians were waiting for hearings and appointments. He kept his voice low as he made demands. Nobody move, nobody call, and he wanted access to the second-floor council chamber to get a high-profile hostage, City Councilwoman Alexis Rourke, who was scheduled to give a follow-up speech and known for her media presence. Security alarms stuttered without full clarity. The modified ventilation shaft, now used as an alternate egress by the perpetrator's scout, allowed his second operative to slip undetected into the attic infrastructure, cutting communication lines above the crisis zone. Chaos bubbled outward. Staff whispered frantically. The armed man, calm and controlled, broadcast through the public address system with a distorted synthetic voice. Everyone stay seated. You're part of a moment. No cops in the chamber. One wrong move and we start pulling names. He had taken hostages strategically. A mix of administrative staff, a young paralegal who was the only child of a single mother, and a negotiator from the juvenile division who'd seen trauma and knew how to keep tension contained. The initial response was disjointed. The desk officers on the ground had no clear picture. The command structure was fragmented because the protocols assumed a different kind of localized disturbance, not a coordinated adaptive siege with mobility. Cooper, hearing frantic radio traffic, strode toward the command post and saw screens that didn't yet tell the whole story. Some camera feeds cut, others looping delayed imagery. He barked orders that sounded confident, but the complexity of a hostage situation with a moving, armed adversary who understood how to use the building's blind spots made his instructions slow to coalesce into a coherent plan. Marcus was in the atrium, mid-discussion with community leaders, when the first constrained scream rippled through the glass. He saw the shift before most did. Adults frozen, security personnel moving with brittle purpose. He heard the fragment of the synthetic announcement bleeding faintly through the ceiling vents. He recognized the modulated tone from frequency analysis drills he had taught years ago. He didn't wait for formality. He stepped toward the staging area where Cooper and the on-site lieutenant were trying to piece together who was taken, who was still free, and what their options were. Cooper's jaw tightened. He had heard Marcus's earlier warnings, and now the building's compromised realities were manifesting. We're dealing with a coordinated containment, Marcus said, cutting through the adrenaline noise. 2 points of access. The main floor is a diversion. The real control is upstairs, and the guy's got a second in the attic cutting comms. You've got hostages in the council chamber and a hidden vantage point above. Someone's watching every move you make. You neutralize the chamber without understanding the overhead threat. You walk into a trap. I need eyes on the shaft, a clean relay for negotiation, and you need to give me a channel to get a sense of his rhythm. Cooper's face hardened, not from disbelief now, but from the sting of being behind. We've got protocols, he snapped. Marcus didn't flinch. Protocols are designed for yesterday's threats. He's adapting in real time. You want the hostages safe? You use what I'm offering. There was an uneasy pause, the weight of past mockery hanging like a fog between them. The lieutenant, with the crisis escalating and the city watching, made the call. Hayes, you're with us. Cooper, don't dismiss it. Give him the floor. We need his eyes. Cooper swallowed, a flicker of humility and frustration crossing his features, his authority bruised by both the unfolding incident and the necessity of accepting help from a man he'd belittled. The command post reorganized. Marcus was granted a rudimentary access badge, functional enough to enter secured subsections, and tapped into the compromised camera feeds, routing through a portable encrypted hotspot he had brought as a habit. He oriented the small crisis team, including Cooper, the lieutenant, a negotiator, and 2 tactical officers, to the perpetrator's behavioral footprint. The hostage-taker had a predictable cycle, scanning every few minutes, issuing demands while listening for movement, and using pauses in his own speech to probe for micro-reactions. The second operative, embedded in the attic, controlled their communication blackout by looping the basic signals. He had engineered redundancy in the comms cut to prevent a simple police override. Marcus's plan hinged on 3 components: stabilization, deception, and surgical movement. First, they needed to buy time with a believable negotiation that appeared to concede small, calm gestures while siphoning information about the hostage-taker's psychological baseline. Marcus coached the negotiator to shift the tone from high pressure to reflective, using the tactical phrasing that disoriented the gunman's attempt to control. Ask open questions about the gunman's grievances without validation, mirror his breathing to synchronize trust momentarily, and gently slide in a what-if scenario that implied a nonviolent exit. Second, they needed a false signal. Using the atrium's public announcement system, Marcus had the tactical team create a distraction, a staged power fluctuation, with controlled blackout in a distant hallway and a pre-recorded audio glitch that mimicked the hostage-taker's own manipulation of system noise. That diversion would draw the second operative's attention downward, where a small team would move to isolate him in the attic, cutting his ability to interfere with comms or see the chamber's breach. Third, the extraction itself had to account for the gunman's line of sight, fear-based triggers, and a plausible escape path that didn't feel like entrapment. Marcus mapped the chamber's acoustics, how sound bounced off wood panels, where shadows formed under the council dais, and how the ceiling vents modulated noise. He instructed 2 concealed marksmen to take positions not on the expected sightline but offset, accounting for the shooter's tendency to fixate on the largest threat, while a small entry team, including Cooper, would approach from a secondary corridor. Marcus would move with a liaison officer through the ventilation maintenance access he'd previously flagged, using it as a covert observation post to time the breach when the gunman's attention was split between the negotiator's compromise language and the decoy signal in the atrium. Before the execution, Marcus pulled Cooper aside. If you try to lead it your way when the moment hits, we lose the rhythm. Trust what I say. I'm not here to take your job. I'm here to keep everyone alive. When the gunman's eyes flicker to the right, that's your cue. Don't second guess. You've got the room. I'm watching the ceiling. We move on the breath. Cooper hesitated, the old superiority warping against the exigency of the moment, then nodded, the unspoken, I'm sorry, turning into the functional, let's do it. The extraction began with the negotiator softening the gunman's posture, presenting a small concession that appeared to give ground, but was words carefully crafted to anchor him emotionally and slow his aggression. Marcus counted the rhythm. Inhale, 1, 2. Exhale. Pause. The gunman's focus drifted slightly as he considered the negotiator's phrasing. That was the moment. Cooper led the secondary corridor team, slate-masked and tension-taut. The attic operative, drawn down by the orchestrated distraction, signaled by controlled ambient noise and a low-level alarm in an unrelated section, left his vantage point vulnerable. Marcus, moving through the maintenance crawlspace, gained the angle above the council chamber, whispering updates to Cooper's earpiece. 2 seconds, he's leaning. Mark Cooper's team surged at exactly the moment, not as a blinding rush, but a synchronized flow. The entry team approached from the flank, the marksman tightened the visual perimeter, and the gunman's eye was caught between the apparent concession and the shadow moving in his periphery. The breach unfolded with surgical precision. One operative slid a signal flare under the dais, non-lethal flash that strobed the gunman's dominant vision, creating a micro-disorientation. Simultaneously, Marcus used his non-commissioned grip to push open a hidden panel, dropping a soft cable with a mic into the chamber to monitor heart rate changes and breathing patterns. Small data points that confirmed the gunman's adrenaline spike, giving Cooper the countdown. Cooper's movement was decisive. He stepped forward with a shielded posture, while the negotiator trained by Marcus continued the verbal anchoring, guiding the gunman's attention away from the entry point as if it were part of the next step in the negotiation. The second operative, isolated in the attic by a quick-moving pair that Marcus had prepped with alternate routes, attempted to re-establish interference, but found themselves under a quiet, efficient containment. No drama, just the realization of being cut off. The gunman in the chamber, now visually overwhelmed, reached for his last control. The flash moment created enough split-second confusion for Cooper's team to neutralize him with devastating, non-lethal accuracy. Cooper himself stepping in to disarm, ignoring the instinct to dominate, instead executing the simplest takedown Marcus had drilled in rehearsal phases of similar scenarios. Hostages were moved out in a controlled cascade. The paralegal's dumbfounded face dissolved into relief. The councilwoman, visibly shaking, wrapped one arm around the young hostage, tears threatening as they were led to safety. Marcus stayed overhead, watching for secondary threats, ensuring the perimeter remained secure, while communication lines were carefully reopened through a restored relay. A collective exhale rippled through the room as the last threat was contained. Cooper, breathing hard, looked up into the maintenance shaft where Marcus hovered, and for a moment the performance of hierarchy dropped. There were no celebratory slaps, just hard, wordless acknowledgement. The debrief was intense and raw. News had already begun to leak. City Councilwoman Rourke, safe but shaken, insisted on speaking to Marcus first, her public persona softening into genuine gratitude. The cameras were outside the temporary command tent, waiting for official statements. Inside, the tactical team and the crisis leadership were unpacking what went right and what came from the brittle edge of failure. Cooper, sitting pinned into a folding chair, stared at a wall map still peppered with tape and markers. He had used Marcus's plan, followed Marcus's cue, and had, in the heat, realized how his earlier mockery had come from a place of insecurity, a reflex that masked the disposal of a deeper bias, the presumption that the veteran's world was stories and not structured competence worthy of deference. He requested a private moment. He found Marcus near the displaced, now quiet shaft, packing up his field kit. The veteran was still keyed to the environment, eyes tracking residual movement, hands adjusting his radio, quietly decompressing. Cooper approached slowly. "I was an ass," he said, the words stumbling like unfamiliar territory. "I heard you, I didn't listen. I thought you were waving a flag to push past chain of command. You saved lives today, because I used your voice, not mine. I'm sorry." Marcus's gaze didn't soften immediately. He'd heard apologies before that were structural, not real. He turned, letting Cooper see the exhaustion rippling behind the calm. "You could have lost a lot of people," Marcus replied. "Or you could have kept pushing your script and they'd be recalibrating by funeral program now. This isn't about being right. It's about doing right when it counts." He extended a hand. Cooper took it, firm handshake, the kind that sealed more than reconciliation. It was a pact to not let that old reflex slide again. The public narrative in the immediate aftermath was complicated. Cooper, in a press conference, made a point of saying, "We had help." Tactical insight from Mr. Marcus Hayes gave us what we needed to move with clarity. The local news caught the tension. Some pundits framed it as a humility moment, others as a softening mischaracterized to preserve institutional face. Marcus declined the spotlight. He accepted the councilwoman's private commendation and, later, a formal invitation to provide a structured after-action briefing to the department. not as an outside consultant but as a contracted partner. The gunman's motives came to light. He was a disillusioned former city employee with a vendetta against a system that had spat him out, and the second operative was a hired opportunist. Their grievances did not excuse the violence. The incident sparked a broader public conversation about what could radicalize someone to that point. Marcus participated not to sanitize the motives, but to contextualize how preemptive listening and collaborative tactical integration might have prevented the crisis altogether. Cooper, in internal training, volunteered to sit on a panel, publicly owning the initial dismissal and pushing for integration of those with unconventional experiential knowledge into tactical planning before future crises. The weeks afterward reshaped bureaucracy in small but meaningful increments. The city's police department, under pressure and catalyzed by the obvious life-saving outcome, launched a new tactical integration initiative, a structured program to onboard civilian subject matter experts, especially veterans like Marcus, into scenario planning. Marcus was offered a nominal advisory title, Tactical Liaison for Civilian Responder Coordination, with a seat in the Emergency Operations Center during high-risk events, and a stipend for training officers in adaptive threat recognition. Cooper, who had quietly advocated within the department for Marcus's continued involvement, became a reluctant but earnest champion, often introducing him in internal briefings as the guy who cut through noise when it mattered. They built a joint curriculum, Marcus's field-hardened instincts blended with Cooper's procedural knowledge, teaching officers how to read deviations in behavior without default profiling, how to adapt rigid protocols when a situation's geometry shifted dynamically, and how to create trust with non-police expertise before crises. The course was framed not as a veteran special, but as adaptive response integration, and it was rolled out department-wide, with a portion reserved for cross-training dispatchers, negotiators, and tactical operators. The hostage crisis became a case study in city emergency readiness seminars. Marcus insisted the after-action deck include the near miss, how the ignored structural modification and the early dismissal of his concerns had created the vulnerability. His point was institutional. Tactical knowledge isn't about ego. It's about ecosystems of information that survive only if prejudice doesn't isolate nodes. Cooper, sometimes still stumbling over the words to talk about race and arrogance without reflexively retreating into jargon, learned to say, "We failed to listen sooner. We now have mechanisms so we don't again." Publicly, there was a plaque placed in the municipal complex's lobby, subtle, not heroic and cliché, honoring Collaboration That Preserved Lives, 2025. Marcus's name appeared alongside a line recognizing the expertise of community veterans and first responders who bridge the divide. Cooper's department instituted an annual simulation where officers and civilian partners rehearsed layered crises. Marcus's methodology was embedded as one of the evaluation criteria. Months later, during a quiet training session, Cooper caught a junior officer smirking in a hall about another old war story guy showing up. He didn't let it pass. He pulled the recruit aside. "You learn those stories," he said, nodding toward the training room where Marcus was demonstrating micro-behavioral cues. "Because the day you laugh at them is the day you walk into a situation thinking you've got all the answers, and you'll need someone like him to fix what you broke." Marcus, for his part, continued his outreach, never forgetting the day the mocking had almost cost lives. He mentored other veterans with tactical backgrounds, helping them translate their experience into institutional language that departments could integrate without forcing them to dilute their identity. He and Cooper, months later, shared a quiet coffee in the same atrium where the crisis had unfolded, the echoes of the past tension now a mutual baseline of understanding. "You kept your word," Marcus said. Cooper nodded. "I'm still learning," he admitted, "but now when I hear a voice that sounds different, I listen before I judge." The hostage crisis, once a moment of near catastrophe, became a pivot, not just for protocols, but for how expertise, race, and lived experience could intersect in the messy, urgent theater of real emergencies.